Welcome to the Coaching Gold Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rudy Jackson, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Dorian Cunion. Dorian, we've got a new podcast today, and if you would, I wanted you to do the honors today and introduce our guest.
All righty. Well, we got a special guest today, and we always let the guests introduce themselves, so I'm not going to steal this person's thunder. I will just set the stage that this is the CEO of my company. It is my boss at work, and then my partner at home. So we have Ederis Martinez-Cunion on with us today. So Ederis, I'll give you an opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
So first, most folks call me Eddie, and except for my husband. And I would say that, I'm the owner and one of the therapists at Your Path Counseling Center. I've owned my own practice for 6.5 years, but I've been doing counseling for a lot longer than that. And I've worked in a couple of different places. I've worked in like hospitals and schools, and I'm married. I've got a couple of kids.
Well, I'm curious, and I know the answer to this question, but love for everybody else to kind of hear it. What led you to get into therapy?
So, I actually started in school as a pre-med student at Hopkins, but I very quickly discovered that that was not for me. Originally, the goal was, because I did love my psychology courses, and originally the goal was I was going to do research. That was my initial thing, but along the way, I did also just have opportunities to work in different fields, different client-facing fields, especially with children. And I think it was very clear when I started working at this residential treatment facility for women with children. There was a children's therapist there, and I was like, oh, I want to be her when I grow up. And and that's kind of what started me on that path of, ooh, you mean I can help kids deal with their feelings and all that kind of stuff. And it just fascinated me, this idea of using toys and games and things like that to help kids process some pretty big trauma that they had gone through, especially like in the setting that we were in.
Well, Eddie, I'm a psychologist as well, and I don't think most people understand how big our field is. And now with many psychological terms being introduced into the daily language that we hear when folks are talking about stress and anxiety, I think folks just think that all psychologists or all therapists do the same thing. And so I think our audience would love to hear what challenges you tend to help most of your clients with who come to you.
So definitely. I agree that it's, funny because a lot of folks do not know what the difference is between a psychologist, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a social worker. Everybody's like, it's very used very interchangeably, even though it's not the same thing. But specifically, I work with folks around trauma and traumatic, like grief and loss. Those are a few of my specialties. And along that line, there's, a lot of like work with anxiety and specifically very specialized OCD work. So those tend to be like my main things that I work with.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, because even those areas are really, really large, especially when folks hear grief and loss. So many people have also experienced grief and loss. But I know you earlier mentioned that one of the things that kind of opened up your focus and your journey was that experience with women with children. And even those specific groups just have such a wide range of challenges that they come with. So I hope we get into that a little more, but that does help our audience see kind of maybe what your day-to-day looks like. So thank you.
So I know when I started your path coaching and consulting, or at least joined, you're part of the organization. We had a lot of conversation about, should it be a separate business? Should it be underneath the Your Path Counseling Center? And you were pretty resolute that that needed to be a standalone business, so that there was that clear separation between coaching and therapy. Tell us a little bit about what led to that decision and what differences you see between coaching and therapy.
Um, I feel like that's a conversation that we always we have pretty regularly, just because I think that, you know, the lines can get blurry sometimes. But I feel like one of the, I think, main differences between like therapy and coaching is that one of the things I've shared is that I feel like coaching is very action oriented. And unlike with therapy, where folks don't really have to be in that action stage in order to be in therapy, right? Sometimes people come to therapy to kind of discover, right? Like, I know that I don't feel okay, I don't feel great, but I really have no idea what's going on with me. And I think because a lot of therapy, and I don't want to generalize, but a lot of therapy is, past oriented. So we do kind of explore like, you know, what what got you here, right? To help kind of figure out how folks got there. And I think that, when folks seek out a coach, right, and they do that, they know what they're looking for, right? Like, they know, like, I need help with this, right? I want to work on this. Versus, like, I get a lot of my folks that are like, I don't really know, right? Even with like my folks that are, trauma and like grief, a lot of times it is very much like, yeah, I know this happened to me, but I don't know why 15 years later I'm still stuck in that place. So I think that that's a big difference between coaching and therapy. I also think that coaching can be, and when I use the word directive, like in therapy speak, like, we talk about like non-directive and directive. And so, with coaching, I think that it is, because it's very action oriented, it can be very directive in the sense of like, here's, some things that maybe you were going to work on, or maybe you should work on, versus like with therapy, I think that there are action or directive kind of parts of it, but it can sometimes be very non-directive as well, right? And so, I think that that's one of those big differences. But I mean, ultimately, too, I think one of the biggest differences when it comes to like the bodies that govern these things is that like I'm licensed by the state, and there's a lot of regulation that's involved in me becoming a therapist, and other people under me like becoming therapists, which I don't think is the same thing for coaching. There's definitely a certification process, but within the field of therapy, there's a lot of certifications too, but there is ultimately that big license that I think, we're just, there's a board that people can report us to, that is a big part of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's is a really good point, because when you think about the coaching industry, for the most part, is unregulated. There are certifications, but there's not a lot of teeth around it. As long as you're not getting arrested, there's not anything that's like policing coaches and their credentials. Unlike therapy, I'm blown away when I think about the hours of supervision, the continuous education, and all the things that are required of a therapist, because there's just a lot of oversight. There's a lot of ongoing education to make sure that people really are getting the best service from somebody that calls themselves a therapist.
Yeah, as I was listening, I was thinking the very same thing, Dorian. And I was also thinking, and I should have been looking more closely at your body language, because Eddie mentioned something about, people coming to coaching kind of knowing what direction they want to go in. And I know we've had a lot of guests on who have said that folks have an idea of where they think they want to go, but then as the coaches, especially the ICF coaches, really take them through that process of discovery and awareness, that they find out that the direction that they thought they wanted to go in may not need to be that direction or need to be the first step in that direction. And so that kind of leads me to a kind of bigger question of like, how would someone like me or a colleague that I have kind of make that decision on, I know I'm in a place that's either where I don't want to be or it's not productive. It certainly isn't on the path of where I want to go to. And how do I then choose to seek out either a therapist or seek out a coach? Do you give people advice when you first meet them who say they want to start coaching of how to choose a coach, or what's the first things they should be thinking about?
I definitely feel like we always tell people, like, one of the things that we encourage people to do is like actually sit down and like read like our bios. We have like all our therapist bios online. We ask them to like kind of look at what that person specializes in. We really, really encourage folks to like have like, we offer like 15-20 minute consultations, which I know Dorian does as well. And so I think that that's super important. Like, I often feel like, I know that when folks make the decision to go to therapy or coaching, right, it very much is like instant gratification. I want to make the call, I want to book the appointment. But I always say, like, slow down, like, interview these people, because this is a long, which either relationship, right? It's not just, it's not a one night stand, right? Like, it's a
Right, right,
relationship. And so you should like talk to that person, right? Feel like, see if you feel comfortable talking to them. See if their style fits you and your personality and your needs, right? So I think that's a big thing for me, is like folks kind of slowing down and like interviewing, because you may come, somebody could come to me. Like, one of the things that I always talk about with like Dorian is like, folks could come to me and they're presenting concerns, around, we talk a lot around like ADHD, and I feel like there's definitely a place for therapy in ADHD, but there's also really a place for coaching within ADHD. And, somebody could come and talk to me, and based off the things that they're saying, I could be like, I really feel like you need more of a coach than you need a therapist, or vice versa, right? They could be talking about, I need a coach, and yeah, maybe you do, but it really also sounds like maybe there's some underlying like emotional regulation stuff, or even maybe some like stuff having to do with your family, that also plays into, your sense of self and identity and those kinds of things that may be getting in the way. So I think it's really important to ask questions, to give yourself the opportunity to explore what the different options are and do your research, right? Like, not quickly, I always sit there and feel like, this is a relationship you should invest some time in developing. It should not be, this was the first person that answered the phone, therefore I booked an appointment and now I'm stuck with this person because,
right,
I couldn't
right.
possibly go do that again.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you just said like interview your potential therapist. I don't know if that concept is widespread, that, and I don't know how true it is, the level of resistance, or the barrier to take the step to actually call a therapist or to call a coach and to say, hey, I want help.
Mhm.
And I know I've had conversations where folks say that barrier can be kind of big, but the notion that also I want help, and before I get that help, let me interview you. And I got this set of questions, because it's almost like we probably invest more time in interviewing, preschool for our kids than we would for, like a therapist or a coach. And so
Yeah.
it seems like there's a lot of education that could be done. And one of the things I try to do is I just try to talk to folks who are interested, and give them examples of, what others have done, because sometimes it is that first step, or a friend nudging them and saying, hey, coaching was really beneficial for me, but it did take quite a bit for me I've been thinking about it for over a year or something like that. I know these issues have gone on, and they're affecting me in a certain way, but I just wasn't ready to deal with them. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that'll help folks understand that it is at that level. It is a relationship, and you ought to go in with the mindset that you're trying to find someone who's a good fit. And to do that, you're probably gonna have to interview, kind of quote unquote interview some folks to find that. And you're making it easy, because you give them that 15-minute discovery call. It's free. It's just 15 minutes of time. So yeah, that's great.
Invest that same amount. I'm like, yeah, people like interview, like, who's going to come, do their lawn care a little bit more than sometimes they interview like the folks that are going to do their therapy. Like, I'm going to go all rummaging in your psyche, right? And so I need you probably need to feel very comfortable with me, and that it's a good fit, right? Because I always
Yeah.
sit there and say, like, there's no one size fits all in this. And so you definitely do your homework and interview people and take that time. Because, yeah, it does take sometimes a lot of time to build up that courage. And I think, and I think that's fair, right? Like, I always tell my folks, my clients, I'm like, there's a reason why this is stored away in the corner, right? Because you didn't want to look at it, right? So, yeah, it took you a while to say, I'm going to take a look at that. And I think sometimes what I've heard from folks is they make that call, they pick a therapist because it was the first person that answered the phone. And then they're like, now I've invested, now they're in session 4 or 5, and they're like, I've invested so much time and energy. I don't have the energy to go look for somebody else now. So I'm going to try to make it work with this person, which is,
Yeah.
From my frame and my conceptualization of people, probably reflective of how they approach a lot of relationships, but, something to think about. Don't get yourself stuck in that if you can.
So diving into that a little bit more. So as I've worked with Dr. Rudy on the Power 6, Rudy is a behavioralist. Like, he is very focused on, if we focus on this behavior, then we can make positive impacts. But that's just one psychological approach to solving problems. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the different psychological approaches that either you or your team use, and, when would it be appropriate for somebody to want to work with a therapist on some of these different modalities?
So I consider myself a very eclectic kind of therapist. I feel like I look at it like, so I use a lot of analogies in my work too. So I tell people, like, for me, having one approach to therapy is almost like trying to build a house, but you only brought one tool. So you're stuck trying to build this whole house with one screwdriver, and it's not going to work. So I think about it like that. But at the core of it, I'm a very person-centered psychodynamic therapist. I really do feel like we have to look back to move forward. And I do feel like I truly believe that everybody has the tools that they need to get where they want to go. And that it's just that there's some things, these things that happen to us that kind of block us from being able to like really access that stuff. At the core, fundamentally, I believe that people have that, and they just need help finding it. And sometimes clearing some of that stuff out of the way, whether it shows up in like trauma, whether it shows up as grief or anxiety or depression, you need help kind of clearing that out so that you can access the very things that you already have in there, right? Because a lot of my folks, I feel like, they're survivors. And I always tell them, like, you got here, so you have what it takes, right? Some of these things may be maladaptive. They may not be working for you exactly the way you want them, but you are a very strong, capable person, right? We just got to channel this into the things you want to be working on and how you want this to look like. I use a lot of expressive arts in my work, probably because I said I started working with children and really wanting to work with children, so I use a lot of play and sand tray and art. Those are my main go-to with the expressive stuff. But movement and music, we do a lot of, like, now we do like walk and talks. So, incorporating like nature and all these kinds of things. So that's me in the therapy room. Although I always tell people, like, it doesn't matter what kind of therapist you are. We all use a little CBT. So everything that um, it was like CBT is like the little sprinkle on everything. So, I can't say that I'm not without my behavioral stuff too, right? Like I will challenge one of my clients. Sometimes I'll be like, wait, like that sounds like that's not within your locus of control. Like where are we in that circle, right? Are we outside the circle? Are we inside the circle? So, we like our little CBT too. And I think, we do EMDR work. Me and a couple of my therapists were trained in EMDR. So yeah, we've got a nice little, our toolkit is full, so to speak. And we work with folks with all kinds of stuff around those things. But yeah. And then, you asked about my team. It's like some of my team is very CBT focused. They're very solution focused. A lot of folks do also kind of come from it from a systems, like a family systems perspective. So yeah, we have I like to, I always sit there and say, like, the folks that work with me, they don't have to believe or practice exactly the way I believe. My kind of thing is like, as long as you have like what this is going to look like at the end, right? You have a clear vision of what your work is going to look like at the end, and you have very strong foundation as to what needs to happen to get you there, right? With the client kind of leading the way, right? I use an analogy with my like folks that I supervise. What I view it as is folks come to us and they're like, I want to be somewhere warm, right? I don't want to be here. I want to be someplace warm. And I would say that like our job is to help them figure out how they're going to get to that place warm. I think that sometimes therapists and maybe some coaches, they jump in the driver's seat and they're like, oh, I know a warm place. And they take their client to a beach in Florida and the client goes, oh, I don't like the ocean. So just because the client said someplace warm, like now we're at the ocean, because that's where I think of when I think of someplace warm, right? Versus like our job is to sit in the passenger seat and just kind of be like, are you sure you want to make this turn again? Because I feel like we've made this turn a couple of times now. Remember what happened the last time we took that turn? So our kind of thing is like a co-pilot, right? And maybe that pesky person that goes, are you sure? I remember that you said that, we wanted to go someplace warm and we really have been, driving north for a long time. What, did the plan change? Like, be curious. I'm curious about that, right?
I really love that you and your team kind of bring that eclectic approach, because you're basically embracing the fact that you can find the best of all these different approaches and bring them to serve your clients. And Dorian probably heard my wheels turning as you were talking about bringing these pieces together. Well, that kind of goes to like our wheelhouse concept, and we just think about folks not just being soloists, but trying to create that orchestra so that the entire team can be successful and serve whoever our one client or many clients may be. So I certainly appreciate that. Even as a behaviorist, I'm not I'm not, I won't show my arrogance here, but I'll play good in the sand. The other thing you mentioned about walk and talks, which a lot of people who are in the business, in the industry, look at that as something that happens a lot for younger clients. But I actually recently saw someone who's an adult coach who was advertising walk and talks actually in Richmond, kind of on a trail around the James River. which apparently went really, really well, which I could see going really, really well if you've got the relationship with the right client who can maybe stay focused and can be open to that, which again just kind of reinforces the notion that there are many, many ways to help clients. So that's great. So I'm really enjoying learning more and more about you and your approach. And I'm not sure if Dorian has any other questions now, but I know we're getting to the point where we give our guests the opportunity to ask us the question. So if you have a question for Dorian or we would love to hear it so that we can think about it and share our thoughts with our audience.
What brought you here?
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't envision myself here only because I have been in higher ed pretty much all my career. And that's actually how I met Dorian at Randolph-Macon. And so as I was teaching psychology classes, I've had some very, very bright students, Dorian being one of them. And 30 years later, he points at one of my programs and says, hey, you should not only be doing this for high school students and college students, there are people in retail, especially early career managers, maybe mid-level managers who are struggling with some of these concepts, probably have never had the leadership training in these areas because they were promoted as kind of high achievers, high performers, and moved into management without leadership training. And Dorian's pretty convincing. And so after a little nudging, he kind of, I'll help you get this thing off the ground. So that's how I got to this place. But I'm a coach, teacher, higher ed person who's created learning experiences. That's where I bring my school psychology training in, is like creating and measuring learning experiences. And that's what's really brought us to this coaching endeavor where we're endeavoring to kind of transform how leaders lead, and I get to do it with a good friend.
Yeah, I would say that I didn't really envision that I'd be doing coaching or consulting. I worked for corporate America and like I had what I was doing there. And I attribute a lot of the success that I had over my career to like having you as a sounding board at home. I'd go home and I'd say, I'm having this problem with this employee, and you would share with me some type of psychological approach, and it would typically work. So, one thing that I know is that in business school inside of corporate America, they don't really teach us to understand people. They don't teach us about motivation. They don't teach us about just how to be more effective. So as I progressed in my career and started just learning different principles and teaching some of the things that I learned from you and from doing reading, I just found that it helps with leadership. So I feel like there's this huge wave now within corporate America around psychological safety and being trauma informed and a lot of those things. And I just appreciate being in a situation where I can like take the business knowledge that I have and sit down with whether they're mid-level professionals or small business owners and say, okay, like these are the financial metrics. These are the goals that we need to have. We need people to get that done. The better we can understand the psychology of people, the more effective you're going to be as a leader, the more impactful and successful your employees are going to be, and the more that everybody's actually going to achieve their goals. So when I got introduced to the Power6 Leader program and just got to see like how like segmented and broke down everything was and how easy it was to kind of follow, I was like, Rudy, like we gotta put this together. We gotta get this out to the world. So we're starting to make a little traction. Hopefully we can continue to make this grow.
Yeah. So it sounds like somebody owes somebody a coaching bill. It sounds like there's a bill that needs to be paid.
I tell her all the time, like she could be like the small business therapist because like she's a business owner. She understands like the challenges of managing employees and clients and all those things. So, you said I'm compelling. We'll see if I can compel her to niche down and become the small business therapist.
Well, I will be watching eagerly. And to that though, I know I happen to know a little bit about the Virginia market, the Richmond market, and even some of the trends that I see here in Georgia and Atlanta, where there has been a spike in the need and the requests for mental health support. Some might just imagine that you're just booked and couldn't take on another client, whereas you might say you would love more clients. So we want you to take this opportunity to let our audience know how they can contact you to get services and support.
Yeah, so luckily I do have a big team, so we do always have space for folks. And yeah, like you said, there's definitely an increase in need. And folks can reach out. We have our website, which is www.yourpaththerapy, all spelled out, .com. And on there is our phone number, email addresses, and even contact forms. People can contact us directly off the website. We try to make it very easy to get a hold of us, because we do understand that it's tough to reach out to folks for help. So we try to make it as easy as possible to get a hold of us. And I always tell people, like, my goal is someone's going to get back to you. If you call on a business day, it's definitely within that same day. If you contact us like during like not business hours, somebody's going to get to you within 24 hours at the latest. But usually, that's kind of first priority, is getting in contact with people, because I do know that, I don't know why exactly, but like sometimes like people sit there and would tell me, like, and I know I've had the experience myself when helping folks find therapists, that you like send all these messages into the void and you don't get responses. So I pride myself on, we do respond to people. Even if we can't meet your need, we will sit there and call you and try to help you find somebody that can. Like, for example, sometimes we get requests for like psychological evaluations, like ADHD evaluations, that kind of stuff. We don't do that, but I know psychologists in the area that do, so we pick up the phone and we give people that information so that you know that your message was received and you get an answer. That's really important to me.
Yeah, well, I really love that, because I know how important that is, not just in crisis, but when that person reaches out to get that timely response to, like you say, have the opportunity to connect or get a great referral. Either one is great. And so I just want to let you know, Eddie, that, Dorian and I conceived the podcast as a place for coaches to come and inform folks about themselves and their business. But what you've done today has really provided even more clarity for folks who know they need help but have these questions. And whether they walk away saying, I know I need X or I know I need Y, but hopefully just the information has encouraged them to seek out, and just whoever's first, just reach out to them, and then they can get to the people they need. And so I'm just really thankful for your time, for, sharing everything that you're doing. Wish you a whole lot of success. And so with that, I'll let Dorian kind of close us out tonight.
Yeah, I'll just put in a plug. When I think about my best clients that I've worked with, a lot of them have worked with a therapist at the same time that they've worked with me. And at first I didn't understand why, because it's like, okay, I felt like we were doing similar work. But as I've just learned more about the work that the therapy team does and how it's different than what I do, I'm very much in this moment. Okay, you need a job, you need to make more money, you need to lead more effectively. Let's develop a plan on how to do that. A lot of times there's like trauma, or somebody is bipolar, or they have ADHD, or something that's going on that is getting in the way of doing what they want to do, even when they have a clear plan. And most of the clients that struggle the most with me, they're actually in a form of depression, and it's just not something that I had the skill set to deal with. So what I encourage, if you are, debating about change, if you're working with a coach and you're not getting the traction, talk to a therapist, because they can really help you kind of determine, is therapy another person to have on the team to help you achieve your goal? And then work with a coach on something very specific, whether it's working with a career coach or ADHD coach or an executive coach, but really using the coaching to get hyper focused on action and moving forward, and then having that therapist that you work with for working backwards and working for more long-term systemic solutions. So if you are looking for a coach, I'm really focused on working with small business owners right now. You can find me at www.yourpathexecutivesolutions.com. Love to sit down with you, talk with you, understand what your goals are, and see if I can help you.
All right. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end our podcast today. Again, Eddie, thank you so much for your time and all your valuable information. Dorian, thank you so much for bringing Eddie to us, and we will just wish our audience a wonderful day. See you guys next episode. Bye.